Now let's start with some strong words from Sir Keir Starmer. The Labour leader has said his party would oversee a total crackdown on the availability of knives on our streets and is promising a comprehensive ban to tackle the issue of knife crime. Starmer has hit out at ministers' delay in bringing forward a promised ban on zombie-style knives, pledging to instead extend the ban to a far wider range of weapons and toughen current rules on serration and blade length. However, it is yet to be implemented. I can now speak with Shadow Attorney General Emily Thornberry. Emily, welcome to GB News. It's a pleasure. This sounds like a fantastic idea. Who would disagree that knife crime is a cancer that's scourging the streets of Britain? How would this ban work?
Yes, we're going to take some action if we get elected. We've had 16 different press releases from the government saying they're going to do something about it and yet to see any proper action on it. What we're going to do is, for example, on these zombie knives, at the moment you could, if you wanted to, go online and order some and they would be delivered. So they have not been banned, despite what the government may have said. There are so many loopholes. And what we would say is this, is that at the moment you can buy these things on marketplaces so that you'll get an individual or an independent company going onto the marketplace. We need to make sure that we go after the executives who are allowing this to happen. So online executives who allow their platforms to be used in this way will face criminal charges. And we think that that's likely to focus some minds a bit and make sure that they do actually ban these things. I mean, there are other things like swords and all sorts of things that we need to make sure that people cannot buy online, because that is the way in which people are getting around the current rules. So that's the number one thing that we would do, and that's what we have announced.
OK, so the clampdown on selling knives is one thing. What about punishing those who are caught carrying knives? You say the Tories are letting down a generation on knife crime, but some of the highest knife crime areas are in Labour-run areas, particularly in London. A 36% year-on-year increase in robberies at knife point, 8,000 incidents a year, and that's happening on the watch of Sadiq Khan, London's Labour mayor.
In the area in which I represent, I have far too often had to go and see mothers who have lost their sons through knife crime. This is an issue that I feel very strongly about. I am pleased to hear that the amount of teenage homicide in London has gone down by 50% recently. That's good. Every death is an absolute tragedy. But we need to make sure that we do more and we work harder. And the things that Sadiq has done, he's been pushing in the right direction, but he needs a national government to work with as well. And what we would do if we were in the national government was that we would make sure that we had all kinds of things in place in order to make sure that we push youngsters in another direction and away from crime. So we would make sure that we had mental health workers in every single secondary school and part-time mental health workers in primary schools. We would have hubs around the country, 156 of them, that would be paid for, where we would bring everyone whose job it is to keep kids out of the criminal justice system together in order to ensure that they work together, they identify the people who are likely to be at risk and make sure that they are pushed in another direction instead. And when it comes to sentencing, we have been let down by this government, who still have £2.7 billion that they have earmarked for building more prison places, and they've yet to do anything about it. They need to build those prison places so that we can make some proper choices. It seems to me that if you persistently carry a knife, if you are one of these hard cases, you should go to jail. But unfortunately, at the moment, people are not sent to prison because there aren't the places there. And yet we have the government sitting on that money and not building the prison places that we need.
And that will be music to many people's ears. Listen to this. Emily, there's a case going on at the moment in Nottingham. My home city, Vado Kalakani, went on a stabbing spree, 3 dead. The mother of one of the deceased, Grace O'Malley Kumar, her mother, Sinead, today, a couple of hours ago, said, I would like to see mandatory jail terms for knife carrying. Is that a policy that you'd like to see enacted?
I think that if we have people persistently carrying knives, these hard cases, they should go to jail. And the number of them that have gone down has gone down by a third in recent years. That is very serious. We do not have the prison places at the moment to be able to send people who carry knives to jail in the way that we would want to.
And can I also ask you about the contentious issue of stop and search? Many times on GB News I've spoken with former Metropolitan Police officers and those who work in the area saying it is an effective tool. But of course it's been seen as controversial by some in the Labour Party. Again, Sadiq Khan vowed to stamp it out when he was elected as mayor in 2013 because he felt it was racist. What's your take on stop and search?
I think that stop and search can be one of the tools that we use, but it isn't the only one. And it needs to be done properly. And it needs to be done in such a way that people do feel that they are not being targeted because of the colour of their skin, but they're being targeted because of the risk. Now, there have been times in my area where we have had knife crime and youngsters have been genuinely frightened and have been tempted, therefore, to carry knives for their own protection, as they always say, and they must not. And so what has happened is that the police have introduced a policy of randomly stopping people. And when we looked at the statistics, we saw that there were not the complaints that there are sometimes, and that people have been treated respectfully. But also, if you looked at the racial backgrounds of the people who have been stopped, they exactly reflected the people who lived in my area. Now, if it's done in that way, it seems to me that that is fair. If it's seen to be done in a way whereby people feel that they're being picked on because of their colour, then obviously it's not going to have the support that it needs. We need to work together on this, and we need to make sure that our communities feel sufficiently safe so that our young men don't feel that they have to carry a knife because they're afraid that they might be attacked. That we have to stop.
And I think people will totally agree with that. How do we reach these young men, often fatherless, often directionless, often purposeless, and they carry knives on a daily basis? How do you break that cycle?
I think that when you become a teenager, you want to find another way. You want to move away from your family. You want to grow up. And so you look around to see, who should I copy? Whose wing shall I come under? I'm still, and so at that point, you get youngsters who are incredibly vulnerable to gangs, but they also could find themselves historically a teacher that they liked, a sports teacher they liked, a youth worker. This is what we need to go back to, so that youngsters have someone outside the family who they can look up to and who they can make decisions about who they want to be and who they can compare themselves to, not just to their family, but outside influences as well. And if we don't provide those, then what happens is that people fall in amongst their contemporaries. Some of them are fine, but some of them are most definitely not. And you get people groomed to go into gangs and taken advantage of. And that vulnerability is what pushes them in the wrong direction. And if we're serious about dealing with crime, which we must be, then we have to do something about that.
OK, Emily Thornberry, Shadow Attorney General, thank you very much for joining us on GB News with your plans to crack down on knife crime. Joined in the studio now by Chris Hope. That's common sense stuff, and there'll be few people, irrespective of your political flags, watching this show that will disagree. It's a terrible scourge on society. We haven't done enough to clamp down. And as I alluded to, there have been barriers, politically correct barriers, particularly around stop and search and race, but that's a common sense idea.
I think so, yeah. I think you saw there firm language there from Emily Thornberry, the Shadow Attorney General. This week we are seeing speeches, I think, coming up from Keir Starmer about crime and being tougher on crime. We go back to Tony Blair's time, tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime. You heard there, didn't you, Emily Thornberry saying, she said people who often and repeatedly carry knives should go to jail. There aren't enough places. Would Labour pay for more places? We are getting really into the meat of an election campaign when you hear Labour being so tough on crime, as you heard there.
But of course, the ban on zombie knives, we've heard this a lot. This is an idea that's been knocking around for ages. It was in the King's speech recently. This really is becoming a bit of an old chestnut now. No one's ever done it. And how would it be enforced?
It's hard because as soon as you ban a certain serrated blade or length of blade, the manufacturers make one a bit less than that, or the serrated edges are not quite as sharp or as pronounced, I should say. So they get round it very quickly. And what they're trying to do is a one-size-fits-all ban, and that's proving challenging. Of course, it's enforced by training standards. Labour's right to say all this. We're expecting some news from the government on this tomorrow, Thursday, and we'll hear more about that. But you are right. I've been reporting on this enough to know we have repeated attempts at banning, and it's so far failed.
But it is nevertheless an astonishing situation where the Labour Party is out law and ordering the Conservative Party. This is what the Tories should be proposing.
We are hearing more from them tomorrow. I think tomorrow is more of a crime day, if you use that vernacular in Westminster politics. So we'll be hearing more. They're getting ahead of it here, I think. But there's no question, I think, safety, the streets and being safe on the streets and policing is going to be a big issue in the election.
And it is absolutely true. Now, that's why I put it to Emily Thornberry. The parts of the country with the worst knife crime tend to be on a Labour watch.
She wouldn't bite into that, would she? I mean,
but it is true.
You talked about Islington, and she said, well, there has been a fall in deaths and homicides, and she talks, I thought, emotionally and personally about when she meets families, and you mentioned the dreadful stabbings in Nottingham.
Yeah.
I mean, she gets that, she understands that, she's not immune to that, but she was loath to have a go at the Mayor of London.
But it is true. People might be getting stabbed to death less, but as I said, there's a 36% year-on-year increase in muggings at knife point, including on the streets of Islington, an area I know well. It's cheek by jowl with the haves and the have-nots. It's a classic area for street muggings, right on her streets. This is happening on a Labour watch.
And she said, if we form a national government, we'll give the tools for people like Sadiq Khan to be tougher on those stabbings. But yeah, there's no question it's a failure really on their watch. But she's keen to help.
And how it's implemented is the key detail, because you can't say you're going to be tough on crime and then go, oh, we don't want to offend the community or risk losing votes. So let's see what happens. Let's turn to other matters. Now, we had Lee Anderson in the studio early. We had a bit of fun with him, but he wasn't especially happy about an article that had been written about him where ostensibly was accusing him of grovelling back to Rishi and regretting one of his votes.
I think it's semantics. I mean, I think he was being a bit unfair on the Telegraph there. It's semantics. Essentially, he was saying, the article said he wants his job back, and he said if he's offered his job back, he'd take it. I mean, it's basically the same thing. He would go and see the PM, have a chat. There's been some language out from Number 10 at lunchtime saying, we like Lee Anderson, we've seen what you said, we know he wants it to get better. I think this is, for me, it was political naivety, not recognising that sometimes you've got to take the victory, and rather that he got into a bit of a battle over an issue of sovereignty and an issue of principle. But I think they would be happily having him back. He is a key person for the Tory party in winning those red wall, holding on to those red wall seats at the election.
OK, we've got a quick clip of what he said here. Let's throw to that now.
The article, I didn't say I wanted my own job back, Martin. The question was put to me, if Rishi came knocking on your door and asked you to come back as deputy chair, would you accept? I said yes. That's slightly different for me asking for my job back.
It is a bit potatoes, tomatoes, tomatoes.
You say tomato, I said tomato. I think he's essentially saying, we had Heather Wheeler, the former senior whip in the same seat 2 hours ago. She said, just go and have a cup of tea with Rishi. And it'll sort itself out. And that's where we are. But he is being widely mocked. He is quite honestly a sensitive person, isn't he? And you heard that. He didn't like being mocked by Labour MPs when he nearly voted no last week and then walked out the lobby. Yeah,
and he said that his bookings haven't gone down. In fact, his bookings have increased.
They love him. They love him out there. And particularly in the southern areas. They want to hear what the north is saying. How is this person? The first time he voted Tory was for himself. In 2019 as an MP. Before that, he was a Labour councillor, of course, and Labour supporter. And they want to know, well, the road he's been on is fascinating for Tories.
Yeah, super stuff. Chris Hope, always a pleasure, never a chore. Thank you very much.